Welcome to Water Sessions, a Water Council podcast. Mention any risk anywhere in the world, and you'll find a connection to water. We explore water challenges and the future of water innovation with experts in the water community, sharing stories and perspectives that you won't hear anywhere else. A special thanks to our series sponsor, Rexnord, a global leader of advanced water management solutions and smart technologies. Rexnord solves smarter for its customers to deliver hygienic, safe, and efficient products that protect human health and the environment. Additional support is provided by the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. And now, the host of today's water session, Matt Howard.
Welcome to Water Sessions, a Water Council podcast. My name is Matt Howard. I'm the Vice President for Water Stewardship at the Water Council. And today we're excited to have Will Sarni, founder and CEO of the Water Foundry, on our session this afternoon. We're going to kind of dive into some topics, water-related, obviously. We're going to focus on water stewardship within the framework and the conversation surrounding ESG, environmental, social, and corporate governance. We'll talk about what is water stewardship and what is ESG in a minute. But first, let me just tell you a little bit about Will. Will's an internationally recognized thought leader on water strategy and innovation. He was ranked as a key player pressuring businesses to care about water, and one of the top 15 interviews in Smart Water Magazine 2019. He's been a sustainability and water strategy advisor to multinationals, water tech companies, investors, and non-governmental organizations for his entire career. Will works with multinationals on corporate water strategies, water tech innovation, and water market entry strategies. Prior to founding Water Foundry, Will was a managing director at Deloitte Consulting and founded and led the water strategy practice there. He was also the founder and CEO of Domani, a sustainability strategy firm prior to Deloitte. Will's also a seasoned author. He's written numerous books and articles and continues to present on subjects such as the value of water, innovations in digital water technology, the circular economy, and the energy, water, food nexus. Will, those are some highlights. You've got some experience, which is obviously why we've got you on the podcast today. So tell us a little bit more about Will. Did I miss anything? Is there some highlights there you want to dive into before we get into our topics today? But just thanks for being on the podcast.
It's really my pleasure. I love these conversations with you, Matt. You get me to think differently, and that's always good, being a consultant. How I landed in the world of water is that I started my career as a hydrogeologist. My degrees are in earth and environmental sciences, and managed to get a job with a consulting firm by the name of Garrity and Miller, which now feels like a million years ago, and just fell in love with fresh water and, the notion of delivering safe drinking water to municipalities, but also supplying water to industrial clients. So my early work really got me hooked on the private sector's view of environmental issues, got very involved in Superfund programs, and it was really a logical progression over time to start thinking about, well, what's the role of the private sector in sustainability and all that encompasses, and then decide to really, in some ways, go back to my roots and focus on water strategy and everything that means for the private sector. So grew up in New York, fell in love with the American West, and that's been pretty much it.
And you're based in Denver, is that correct?
Yes.
And Denver is obviously in the crosshairs, or at least Colorado and the Colorado River Basin are a bit in the crosshairs in terms of climate change and impacts on water resources. So to a certain extent, not only are you working in this field, but you're living within some of these issues that we're trying to deal with.
Yeah, it does sharpen the mind. And, it's interesting you bring that up. Yes, the Colorado River Basin, increasingly in the news, not for good reasons. We're a headwater state, and that's actually a state responsibility that's pretty significant in terms of how we manage water, not just for the state of Colorado, but for the other basin states that are downstream. And in a lot of ways, that is a reflection of some of the broader issues that we're both involved with in the world of water, collective action, engaging a range of stakeholders to solve water problems, because you just can't do it alone. The state of Colorado can't solve water just for itself. It doesn't work that way. So yeah, being out here, water's in the news all the time.
That's a really good introduction, I think, into one of our topics today, which is water stewardship. And you've kind of hit on a couple points which are near and dear to my heart. The first is, what is the role of the private sector within this whole sustainability conversation and sustainability actions? And that certainly relates to water and water stewardship. But also the fact that you've used this term before, so I'm stealing this from you, is that water is a wicked problem. And as such, we do need to collectively address water issues. As you say, the regulators can't do it alone. Private sector can't do it alone. And so within this very complex and difficult conversation, there's this concept known as water stewardship. So I'm just going to read the definition of water stewardship, and then I want you to react to that. And I want to talk a little bit about where you feel the private sector is in terms of water stewardship. So this is from the Alliance for Water Stewardship. As you obviously know, the Water Foundry is a member of the Alliance for Water Stewardship. And in my role at the Water Council, we serve as the regional partner in North America for the Alliance for Water Stewardship. So I like this definition. So here it is. The use of water that is socially and culturally equitable, environmentally sustainable, and economically beneficial, achieved through a stakeholder-inclusive process that includes both site and catchment-based actions. So there's a bit to bite off there. There's a sustainability component, a sustainable use of water. There's a stakeholder component, which kind of gets at the idea around collective action. And then there's this idea about kind of linking what you're doing at your site, at your factory, at your farm with the surrounding conditions in the watershed or the catchment in which you operate. How do you feel about this definition? Does this adequately capture your concept of water stewardship?
It captures water stewardship, but it doesn't capture my point of view completely as it relates to I hate to just say the role of the private sector, because that implies that there is a burden on the private sector. For me, it's what are the risks to the private sector and what are the opportunities? And the definition of stewardship historically has left out that business opportunity side of the equation. And it's not to position the private sector as sort of mercenary in terms of capitalizing on scarcity and poor water quality. But for me, the sort of full, robust opportunity for the private sector is certainly water stewardship. I'm not throwing it out, but there's more to it. And this is going to be a long answer, Matt, so have a sandwich. When I got into the world of water, it was water management. It was compliance issues. It was whatever you did within your four walls or a fence line was pretty much it. Water stewardship came along and it was groundbreaking. It acknowledged that there's a range of stakeholders that have to come together to solve wicked water problems. And the private sector has an opportunity and a role to play in engaging in the watershed, engaging with their supply chain, engaging with consumers and customers. And what I push is the third wave, which is what's the opportunity for the private sector that supports their brand value and business growth, which I believe will result in greater investment and problem solving.
One of the areas that maybe irks me a little bit about water stewardship conversations is a lot of times we do forget this idea of shared challenges and shared opportunities. So whether you're looking at corporate water stewardship or site level, as we deal often within the AWS world, site level water stewardship at the factory or farm level, the focus is still, even within that water stewardship conversation, still within the fence line and still within the four walls of that facility. And it really requires an extra push and additional understanding to really get them to think beyond the fence line, beyond the four walls. And when we really, truly, and collectively address those shared challenges and opportunities as it relates to water stewardship and water issues which are facing us where we live and work, that's when we really get into true value creation, if you will. And I think kind of links us to this idea that even you and I have written about before, connecting water stewardship and brand value. So how do we push companies in the private sector to really get to that opportunity side of the equation?
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the punchline in all of this. You know, you can have a point of view and a belief, but the reality is, well, how do you frame the value proposition differently? How do you engage with the right stakeholders? For me, it's a few things. And I'll add a little bit of color on how I believe we got to where we're at, which is water stewardship was dominated by company relationships with NGOs. And there are numerous examples. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but we have to keep in mind that most, if not all of those NGOs are focused on conservation issues. And as a result, stewardship is about what's my water footprint, either in my operations or complete value chain, and how do I reduce it, and how do I invest in conservation programs and collective action that is consistent with the mission theory of change for those NGOs. And again, what that leaves out is if I'm an information communication technology company, I should understand how much water I'm using, reduce the use, recycle, whatever I can do, engage with stakeholders within the watershed. However, my contribution to solving water is undoubtedly greater by leveraging what I bring to the marketplace. So if I'm making semiconductor chips, then my ability to scale Internet of Things, IoT, smart devices to solve scarcity and quality issues will undoubtedly dwarf my water footprint or saving 5 gallons a day at a facility. So that's the conversation I believe we have to have. And that leads to your question, which is, well, okay, how do we change it? Well, I think we have to have that different conversation with different stakeholders within a company. If it's the chief sustainability officer or the person responsibility for water stewardship, it's going to miss out talking to the business development teams, the innovation teams, the people that are running business units, things like that. So broadening the dialogue within a private sector company to engage not just the risk stewardship side of the house, but the people that drive revenue, brand value, profitability is, I believe, now critical.
So bear with us, audience. We're about to go down into some detail and nuance here. But Will, I mean, you've been a consultant with the private sector for many years. I've worked with the private sector, both from the kind of a government angle as well as an NGO angle. And you've touched on a really important issue here within the corporate world, and the fact that a lot of these sustainability related functions are often siloed and separate from other core business units within the company that you're working with. And we're not quite there yet in our conversation to talk about ESG, but as we get into that conversation on ESG later in this session, how do you bridge the gap between the sustainability folks and the investor relations group and the government relations group? Sometimes there's a touch point around corporate reporting, and obviously that relates to the ESG conversation. But this is one of the issues that I face day in and day out in my work is even between the sustainability group and often, the operations side of the equation, the facility might not hear from corporate all that often. And then all of a sudden, the sustainability person is calling in from New York or Chicago or somewhere and saying, hey, we're doing this new sustainability initiative or this new water stewardship initiative. What's your experience? How do you bridge that gap in our world, in the water professional world? How do we encourage those conversations and really broaden the scope of our conversation around water stewardship?
Again, that's the crux of the issue, the challenge here. And I think it requires all of us to think differently about who we engage with. I mean, when was the last time either one of us went to a marketing conference? Well, that goes into a whole discussion. When was the last time we went to a conference? But
right.
Imagine the two of us speaking at a conference for chief marketing officers or people that lead brand or corporate affairs, corporate communications, or a CFO event. So I'm a firm believer that we need to get out and speak to people that really don't know our jargon and don't know the value that water stewardship or corporate water strategy can deliver to their brand, new market opportunities, growth, profitability. I'm concerned if we leave it to the CSO, for example, they are burdened enough, and it's a difficult process because they're viewed as overhead, not a profit center, and that's a challenge. So I think the way we support our colleagues that are working inside of corporations is getting out and speaking to the people that need to know more about what they do for a living and see how you create business value, not just manage risk. And I've got an idea for a paper, Matt. So I think there's something we could do with this. Honestly, that point of view was very much shaped when I was at Deloitte. It became really clear that while it was interesting to bring Will, the water guy, in to talk to clients about water and water as a risk, it was a bit of a yawner, It was like, talk to so-and-so. When we framed water as a business growth opportunity, and we wrote a few papers on fueling growth, very different engagement. Very, very different. It became a compelling argument. And we started to have conversations with CFOs, for example.
This kind of ties in a little bit into this idea that you mentioned about companies leveraging what they bring to the market to help promote and amplify the impact on water stewardship, and kind of this juxtaposition between water footprint and I think what you've called the water handprint. So looking at this concept around water footprint and water handprint, and then this idea that we often run in the same circles, I call them the usual suspects. You've just mentioned, for instance, a chief marketing officer, chief financial officer. Do you think this idea around the water handprint really leads to helping the CFO and the CMO better understand the business opportunity around true engagement in water stewardship?
I believe it does. And that title came from a friend of mine who works for a semiconductor company. And a few years ago, he talked about footprint versus handprint within the context of carbon, climate change. And what I did was expand that and use that as a way to communicate what I've learned over the past several years in terms of who do you talk to and how do you frame a value proposition differently. So yes, I believe that's where we need to go. Again, not to replace stewardship, but to build on it and create a value proposition and language that engages business units that are designed to drive revenue, profitability, market growth, and so on. So, I believe we can run with that. And, the feedback I got was positive. It was, oh, well, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way. And honestly, over the past several months, we've been having more of those conversations around, well, what's the business opportunity in addition to, well, I'm doing all this CSR stuff and trying to reduce my water footprint and so on, but I never thought about, or we haven't really built a strategy around our role in solving water and what might that look like.
It goes back to kind of a thread of a conversation that you and I have had, and certainly, and again, that you've written about, is this idea that, at least in your estimation, water stewardship is stalled. And I don't know if I 100% agree with that. I certainly think we've hit a plateau. But I think, without putting words in your mouth, I think both of us are aligned around the idea that there needs to be a catalyst. And whether that's reframing the issue and reframing, again, this idea around opportunity for businesses, or kind of getting us a little bit into this CSR to ESG conversation, my feeling that in order to really have change in corporate America and in the marketplace, companies really need to feel pressure from consumers and from investors. So as both of us kind of view the water stewardship phenomenon, and both of us are looking for ways to either reframe that conversation or to keep pushing companies forward, do you think that this whole ESG thing can truly be a catalyst to really start getting companies to move beyond simply doing random acts of kindness in their CSR report and get down to a true water strategy, water actions, not only change how they operate, but change how they impact others in the world in which they operate?
So the short answer is yes. And you know me well enough to know that I won't leave it with a short answer. To me, that goes back to the business opportunity equation.
Yeah.
It's all right. So if I think about water in a way that draws more investors to my company, whether I'm a startup or a multinational or whatever, then that's a positive. That's not a risk discussion. That is a business growth discussion. If I am focused on social performance and engaging with customers, consumers, and other stakeholders, that will drive more people to fall in love with my brand and buy more of my stuff or services. That's a positive discussion, which is counter to, oh my God, my water footprint is X and it's only so many swimming pools compared to so-and-so, I'm doing great, right? Well, no, it should be, I'm going to focus on water stewardship, water strategy, and engage with stakeholders in a different way because I will improve my brand value, sell more stuff, retain employees, attract employees, whatever it may be. So I don't like the word pressure because to me, and again, that's the stick. I believe we have an opportunity to lead with you can drive your business if you start focusing on social impact issues. And I believe the pandemic has accelerated that. I'm paying more attention to companies that stepped up legitimately and did good things during the pandemic. And I'm not going to buy from companies that fired thousands of their employees with a tweet. I am going to spend my money on companies that reached out into the community and delivered food or hand sanitizer, whatever it may be, and actually did something good. I don't think that's going to go away. I'm an optimist, so I believe that's going to stick post. So I don't know if that answered your question, Matt, or it was just a mid-pandemic rant about the opportunity.
Yeah, who would have thunk we'd still be in mid-pandemic at this point in time in 2020? But that's a podcast for another day and other experts.
Your question about ESG, yeah, I think there's a lot of value in, and this ties into your work with Alliance for Water Stewardship. It is stakeholders, investors want companies to prove that what they're doing is having an impact. And AWS does that. It makes perfect sense. It fits nicely into the whole ESG trend, movement, traction.
So let's dive into ESG. And again, for the benefit of our audience and not knowing exactly the level of familiarity with this term or this phenomenon, many people might be familiar with CSR or corporate social responsibility. I mentioned at the beginning, ESG stands for environmental, social, and corporate governance. Can you quickly help us out here? What's the difference between CSR and ESG?
Yeah, I view corporate social responsibility or corporate responsibility as an incredibly dated term and concept. And the reason being is that when we started Domani a couple of decades ago, our value proposition was around the triple bottom line. It's the right thing to do, that whole narrative. And that spawned corporate responsibility, corporate social responsibility, which again doesn't really frame the value to a company. It is, this is a burden. It's an overhead function. And that led to cute reports, glossy photos. This is what we're doing. We're picking up trash along a riverbed, whatever it may be, but really didn't get into the show me and prove it piece, which is, really the world that you live in. So for me, it's limiting, dated. ESG, I'm not necessarily crazy about in a lot of ways, but it gets closer to the performance side of the equation. What are companies doing around environmental performance, social performance, and governance of those issues to be a brand with purpose, have a positive impact on society? And that creates a lot of business value.
So I do want to be clear, though, that for both this idea around water stewardship and kind of moving from our understanding and belief around what is limiting in terms of CSR and where we think things might be going with ESG, both in terms of maybe less water stewardship and more maybe the concept of water management or water conservation and CSR, I kind of view those as it's a foundation to your house. You can't do anything without this foundation. However, the foundation isn't sufficient for you to live in and for you to work in, right? You got to have the roof, you got to have the building envelope, the HVAC, everything else. And so I really feel within the water world, if you will, in the water profession, in some instances, we're still trying to build out our house and where we live, where we work, and where we play. And ESG is a really, in my view, an important component in moving us forward. And I know you don't like the term pressure on companies, but I do. And maybe that's because in my own personal life, I think I perform better in the workplace or wherever when I feel pressure on me. But I don't think there's anything wrong, though, from customers and from stakeholders and certainly from investors to rewarding companies that are truly out there doing the right thing and making a change. And as it relates to ESG, it could be a very lucrative reward, couldn't it, to shareholders, to the business, right?
Yeah, Matt, I agree with you 1,000%. For me, I struggle with pressure because it sounds negative. I would do it as a positive reinforcement to a company to say, you know what? We're going to buy more of your stuff. We're going to invest more money in you because you not only are saying you're doing these things, but you've quantified the impact and had it externally certified. That gets people's attention. I believe we're actually on the same page.
I concur. I will be happy to use positive reinforcement from here on out instead of pressure.
I would love to see more investors say, yeah, this is a great performing company. However, they don't have a clue about social issues, their role in society, their environmental impact. And therefore, we're not going to make the investment because we think it's a short-term win. To me, that's a great message.
So we agree, but we're not going to end the podcast there. We still got a few more topics to kind of cover within the ESG conversation. One thing I do want to do, and I don't know if this is proper or not, I'm reading from our own article, which we have yet to publish. So
I haven't seen any of my PowerPoint slides, but I actually quote myself in one of my slides. So I encourage you to read from our paper.
So I am going to read from our paper. Just a couple little tidbits here, just in terms of how ESG funds, investments, et cetera, have been performing in 2020 in light of the pandemic. And this is actually, I think, some of your verbiage. So as the Dow Jones Industrial Average shed some 34% during Q1 during the spread of COVID, Morningstar reported that 51 out of 57 of its sustainable indices outperformed its broad market counterparts. Additionally, there's BlackRock, of course, has just been in the news repeatedly. Whether it's right or wrong to continue to focus on BlackRock and their announcements, we've got another quote in our paper here from BlackRock. In the first quarter of 2020, they observed better risk-adjusted performance across sustainable products globally, with 94% of a globally representative selection of widely analyzed sustainable indices outperforming their parent benchmarks. So basically, for people that are listening that aren't too familiar with all of that and ESG, these types of funds and companies that are credibly reporting within ESG frameworks and reporting schemes, they're outperforming the market basically, and they're outperforming the market during a pandemic when a lot of other types of stocks and companies are really taking a hit. So for me, talk about opportunity moving forward. Is that how you view this phenomenon, again, as kind of part of this opportunity conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. I view it as good management, good risk management, but also opportunity management. So for those companies that have strong environmental social programs, they're looking at not short-term risk, but long-term risk. And they're also looking at the business opportunities that are associated with those risks. And for me personally, I would rather invest in a company that thinks that way as opposed to, I'm going to do everything I can to maximize profitability in the next quarter and we'll take it from there. So that sophisticated management thinking, sophisticated long-term strategy is very appealing to me, and obviously others in a lot of ways makes perfect sense.
There's a innovation play here too, as well, isn't there? When you move that gaze from just focusing on profit maximization and you sort of broaden your scope and look at how do we identify either new customers, new ways, new channels for sales, looking at, again, how do we leverage what we produce for the broader good? I mean, there's ample opportunities for investment, is there not, within that sort of a conversation?
Yes, I believe so. Scarcity drives innovation. It just does. So how do you do more with less? How do you do more without? And if it was all about scarcity and risk, then companies would not be operating in certain parts of the world. The magic, the opportunity is for them to figure out how to operate in water scarce, water stressed parts of the world. That's a competitive advantage. And to me, Unilever is a really good example of that. they invest in innovative products that use either less water or no water. They make shampoos, they make soaps, and they're obviously not the only one, but they didn't get out of the market. They said, this is a market that we want to be in, and how do we overcome these issues and thrive in a market like that? So again, it's the other side of the coin. It's, yes, these risks are real. We need to deal with them proactively over a long period of time. And then how does that drive innovation and revenue and profitability and all that?
And presumably positive reinforcement, right? From investors and and consumers. Yeah. So one of my issues, I guess, if you will, with ESG currently, as it stands right now in September of 2020, is most of the reporting frameworks and most of the ways that corporates are comfortable reporting about water usage, such that they even do within their ESG reporting, it tends to focus on water security and sort of water consumption type metrics, which is not the full picture. And you just sort of hinted at this, talking about, more broadly speaking, wherever there's water stress, whether that's from a water quality issue, whether that's regulatory uncertainty, whether there's reputational risk associated with making a product in a certain part of the world. I think there's a role for not only the Alliance for Water Stewardship, but for water pros and NGOs and corporates in general to really help up the game within the ESG conversation about how companies report around water stewardship. But what makes that so difficult is really trying to get in an apples to apples comparison. If you've got two factories for the same company and one's in a water scarce region and the other one's in a water abundant region, and they're both reporting on essentially on water consumption, target, it doesn't really tell you anything about water stewardship. And it doesn't really tell you anything either about what you've done within your four walls or back to the opportunity side of the equation, how that's really helping you grow or innovate as a company. What can we do as water pros? We've got a lot of people, listening to this podcast that participate in different parts of the stewardship or the technology conversation. How can we collectively move this conversation forward with those ESG stakeholders that are kind of driving the bus right now on how we report around water within the E aspect of ESG?
Yeah, I think we need to blow up the whole water footprint conversation. We've essentially taken greenhouse gas accounting and moved it into the world of water, and not to be critical of, the early water footprinting work done by Tony Allen and others. But again, it's limiting. So let's not just get stuck on what's my water footprint, and I need to set a goal to reduce my water footprint, and I'm going to report it, and everyone's going to be happy and think that I'm doing a great job. So really challenging the status quo. But also, we're going to have to get to a point where we're not relying on voluntary reporting frameworks. And my view of that has evolved 180 degrees since I started getting involved in the sustainability world, where I really felt that voluntary programs were enough, going to be successful. You could demonstrate business value from sustainability without having it being regulated. But I had that point of view because I spent the early part of my career in environmental compliance and Superfund programs and so on. And I was ready to move into a post-alternative world of voluntary. But again, I'll go back to one of the many things I learned at Deloitte, which is auditing somebody's performance is pretty powerful. And I think Peter Bacher from WBCSD wrote a blog many years ago titled, "I believe accountants will save the world." And I believe that, you get CFOs and accountants on this, they will reconcile all the different reporting and they'll add a level of rigor to it that we're not in a position to do. Now, that probably sounds counter to everything I've said in the past 50 minutes, but we have to push this to a place where we have integrated reporting and auditing. AWS is an important step in that direction, in my view.
I think certainly looking back in my career in sustainability, which maybe at this point is about 15 years or so, there was a point in time some years ago where we as sustainability professionals started having the conversation, we really need to get sustainability and the CFO involved in those sustainability conversations within the company, within the corporation. And we, as sustainability, or in this case, water stewardship advocates, need to be able, to a certain extent, to also make our case with CFOs. And so I agree. I also think there's kind of now going to the auditing side, whether we're talking about a financial audit or an audit to a set of standards or a regulation. Companies are scared of audits, and audits take a lot of time. So to a certain extent, it's a bit of an issue that we face with the Alliance for Water Stewardship in working with companies that seek to get their factories or farms certified to our standard. They have to subject themselves to a third-party audit. But again, to kind of bring this back to the ESG conversation, you've got to have verifiable and credible data and actions that are meaningful. And you may think that what you're doing and what you're reporting on is credible and the right thing to do, but it is often helpful to have that outside set of eyes to really perform that conformity assessment to a rigorous set of criteria or indicators. Should companies be scared of audits, and should sustainability professionals be scared of going into the CFO's office to make the case for water stewardship?
No, I think they should embrace it. I think they should look at it as a positive. Yes, it takes time. There's a risk. But on the other hand, if you come out of an audit in a positive way, that's good for your business. It just is. It goes to the prove it piece. Prove your financial numbers. Well, prove what you're doing on the environmental side and the social side. That has value. I can go to a university and tell someone that I'm interviewing, I had everything verified. We are doing what we say we do. Come and work for us as opposed to our competitor who just has a brochure. And it's the same thing in terms of retaining talent, engaging with investors. I don't know. I view it as positive.
I did not expect us to talk about audits and auditing today.
It's always a roll of the dice when you talk to me.
That's true. So we're kind of coming up to the end of our time for this session, Will. And I mean, we've really covered a lot of ground, from the concept of water stewardship to water footprint, moving into this idea around the water handprint and the opportunity side of the equation. Talked a little bit about ESG and sort of water and water stewardship's place within the ESG conversation. And we got into auditing. I was hoping we would end up on like whiskey or beer or some other water-based. Just as we wrap this up, any concluding thoughts, anything that you wanted to touch on, or a point that you wanted to make that we haven't hit yet?
Well, two things. I mean, look, the pandemic and the impact is truly tragic. But what it has done is it's been an accelerator of trends, as I observed them and others, in that digital technologies in the world of water have, dare I say, taken off. So the digital transformation of the water sector was well underway in January. And I'd say we're pretty close to it not even being optional anymore. So utilities, industries are looking at more digital technology solutions and scaling them. And the second thing, actually there's three. The second is that the social impact side of ESG has always been the most difficult to tackle and to quantify impact. And that has gained a lot more attention. I am thrilled to see that. How we treat humanity in its broadest sense is finally getting the attention that it needs. It's not to say it's where it's an end, but so social impact and engagement has accelerated for obvious reasons. And then also, since the pandemic, we've seen more non-water companies engage with us on looking at opportunities in the water sector. And I view that as encouraging, because we need to get outsiders, and to your point earlier, we need to get them engaged. They look at our problems differently than we do. So it's a welcome trend. So I'd say those three things have been pretty noticeable and prominent in my world and what we're up to.
Well, Will, I mean, I could do this for another hour. Unfortunately, we don't have another hour. If we did, though, we did definitely have to pull in some fermented water beverages and continue this conversation. But I want to thank you for your time. You are an extremely busy individual. You are a prolific writer and thinker on these issues and within the water profession. And you're certainly a voice that keeps moving us forward, keeping us honest, helping us to see what's next as we build this house. Maybe we'll get to a roof at some point in time. We've got the foundation down pat. Now we need to build the rest of this water stewardship house. So, Will, thanks again. Appreciate having you on here.
Matt, I love these conversations. I love writing with you. I look forward to being challenged. I don't pretend to be right all the time, hopefully some of the time. So I would encourage listeners to poke, say, yeah, good idea, accept, fill in the blank. So thanks for the opportunity to have a lively, spirited conversation and continue to build the house with you.
Thanks for joining us today. Special thanks to our series sponsor, Rexnord. Additional support is provided by the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, along with Badger Meter, Kikkoman, and R.W. Baird & Company. Don't miss a beat. Subscribe to Water Sessions today.